Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Christmas season. And you know what that means. It's time to find out which Christmas songs are copyrighted and which ones aren't. And Deck the Halls apparently isn't, as long as it doesn't have lyrics. So, Merry Christmas season, everybody. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays. Yeah, hooray for public domain. Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. And folks, we've got a lot to talk about today. But first and foremost, I wish I had some kind of funeral march tone going on here. We talked last week about how things were not looking great for me in the fantasy realm. We have a 2-week playoff matchup, and I was down by a whopping 36 points, and I ended up losing by, I believe, 38 points or something around that. It was a tough go. I mean, this week we played it a little bit closer, but my season has come to an end. So I'm joining Pat here in the official fantasy football offseason.
I thought you had a shot there at the beginning when you like Laporta, and I forget, you had like 3 guys gone and they all just popped off. So
Laporta and Ty Chandler went for 20 plus in non-PPR, yeah.
I'm like, if this asswipe pulls this off, I'm going to be furious. But then reality set in, and a valiant effort on your part. Sad to say, we were just talking before how, like, had I made the playoffs, I would have been without Isaiah Pacheco, Jonathan Taylor, Mark Andrews, and Tyreek Hill. And I still would have beat Brand's broke ass. I still would have beat him. So now I'm upset that I didn't make the playoffs. And now I probably would have had Pacheco and JT and Tyreek back for the championship as well. Yeah. So
listen, it's not hard to beat a guy that the first week of the fantasy playoffs goes for his season low in points by a mile and loses Nico Collins in the first quarter. CJ Stroud goes for 3. I've never had a fantasy situation quite like this. Like I can recall, Pat, this may be like 10 years ago, but I had a team that started out 7-0, much like this one did. And it was very good on the backs of, I know Julius Thomas was one of my players, the tight end, the year that he popped off. I think I had like Matthew Stafford. Team was really, really good, but as the playoffs approached, I could tell things were slowing down. We were getting down to a crawl, and I just didn't have much optimism. I had reasonable levels of optimism this year. I was like, my team's still good, even after losing Tank Dell, which hurt a lot, but I guess that was the first sign of things to come. But I still felt like the lineup I was fielding was solid. I threw Jerick McKinnon in the flex. He scored a touchdown. Cool, made good decisions there. And you just, you can. I don't use injuries as an excuse throughout the season, because you got to adapt. You got to pick the right guys up, make the right moves, adjust. But there's just not a lot you can do about an injury that happens after kickoff. Like I was forced to take a 1 from Nico Collins, and then Nico going out rendered Stroud useless, and then I'm just trying to pick up the pieces from there. I did what I could. I'm still very proud of my efforts and what I've scraped together, especially after completely losing my first round pick Nick Chubb in week 2. So look, this was a bounce back year. This was a legacy year for me, because after last season I was like, oh, what the fuck is going on? Having, I think, my worst season in fantasy history, going 5-8 on the backs of Kyle Pitts, Juju Smith-Schuster, and doo-doo shit poopster and all that bullshit that was going on. So it was just a bad scene. We've definitely bounced back. But Pat, look, when in a couple weeks here, when the fantasy football season has come to an end for everyone, we'll go over, everything from a season recap perspective. But a lot of people are still playing fantasy football right now, so we need to treat this pod as such. With that said, I do want to go over just a couple things now that you and I are both eliminated.
Are you live in any other leagues, though?
One that doesn't really matter. So I had the Scott Fish Bowl League. I got bounced from that. Because of the Jefferson this was last week, the Jefferson injury and just underperformance from like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. If only I could have survived another week. Those guys did great. But no, not alive in that league. I'm alive in like a follower league, a long-time follower league that I put together. I'm actually the 1 seed there. So we'll see if I can pull that one off. But no, not going to be the champion in any league of significance really this year.
I've got 2, and actually one of them is more lucrative than our league. It is
Mr. High Roller.
And especially since I lost the league last year, hence my beautiful I suck at fantasy football shirt after being the big loser. So, the team's solid. Like the lowest score on my entire team was Brandon Ayuk, who had like 6.97 points. Like even my bench, I had like CEH, McKinnon, Keaton Mitchell, like rest in peace.
Oh, yeah.
Zamir White, like everybody on my team just fucking uncorked themselves. So let's hope we can keep that momentum riding, and I can get a little bit of dough there.
Yeah, I've got one more league that I'll be, setting a lineup for old time's sake. But I will say, though, there's another league that I missed the playoffs in this year, but I do love how they do the consolation bracket. The consolation bracket, whoever wins it gets the first pick the following year.
Yes,
so it's
I
not
have a couple
it's
leagues
not
that
like
as well.
yeah, it's not just, worst team gets first pick like some leagues will do. It gives the people in the consolation something to play for. So I will try to win in that league and get, a high pick next year rather than a mid pick, because that league is also super weird because it's not a snake draft. It's you get the first pick in every round if you have the first pick. So it's an incredible advantage if you can get it. I've been screwed by it a couple times because I get like pick 10 and I pick 10 in every round. Whatever, that's besides the point. But Pat, more importantly, both of us are out of the league that, even if it's not the most lucrative, is the most prideful one that we're in. It's the one that matters. It's the one that we come home to at the end of the day. So I wanted to go through just some lessons that we learned that, looking back, we can apply for next season, because I really do think a lot of fantasy football and succeeding in it year to year is an effort of remembering the previous season. Because look, so much gets lost throughout the course of the offseason, so much perspective, so much context, honestly. Like, people will point to what a player did the previous season, and you'll forget that, oh, there was an injury in the time that they're talking about, or there was a coordinator change. It's information overload, and it's hard to remember everything. So I try to keep things fresh, and I try to keep the most important lessons, at least, at the top of my mind right now, and then I can carry them over into next season. The number one rule that I want to remember for next season, and the number one lesson I've learned, is, this is one I've kind of always gone by, but in the early rounds, play it as safe as possible. Play it excessively safe. Like, be fucking paranoid. Like, looking back, you and I talked up players such as Tony Pollard and, Travis Kelce, Saquon Barkley, like these guys in the first round and second round who, are good players, and there's certainly narratives that could be built around them being valuable fantasy picks at the spot they were drafted. But at the end of the day, they all had red flags that, like, everyone, you could pick up maybe some level of red flag, right? Some concern, but some are going to have more than others. And at the end of the day, those are guys that I want to stay away from. I want to find literally the safest, absolute safest possible players. And so the lessons to come along with that are, number one, I'm done picking players that are coming back from injuries or suspensions. Just completely done with it. Now, I don't think there's going to be any well, I say that, but yeah, I guess there won't be any players coming back from suspensions, like a year-long one, such as a Deshaun Watson or a Calvin Ridley. But this is in reference to Calvin Ridley and, a guy like Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard obviously had a surgery that, honestly, not a lot of people talked about in terms of it affecting his effectiveness throughout the season. They were just like, okay, this is a procedure. He's going to be ready for the start of the season. It's, relatively clean comeback, but it's zapped his explosiveness, and we've seen that. Calvin Ridley's a guy, as good as he looked in the preseason, as enamored as we got with that route running clip and how he, a couple of nice catches in preseason games, I just have no desire anymore after seeing him and Deshaun to pick any player that has taken a long time off from playing football. It feels like it's too hard to come back from. And I don't want to dive into that anymore if it comes up with another player. Luckily, like I said, it doesn't seem like we're going to have anybody like that going into next year, at least not one that's going to be a high draft pick, but it just seems like adjusting to NFL speed is a lot tougher than we maybe gave it credit for, even if a guy like Calvin, looked good in the preseason. He's my biggest regret, I think, this year. It's like, I mean, look, every player basically that had an ADP in the third round kind of sucked to an extent, other than like Mark Andrews before he got hurt. But it was a tough one with Calvin Ridley for sure. But yeah, I'm done with players coming back from suspensions, done with players coming back from injuries in the early rounds at least. So that, as much as I hate to say it, like, I'm off Nick Chubb for next year. I don't want to spend an early pick, because I'm sure that as long as he's back ready to go, he'll be at worst a late second round pick coming off that injury. And I just don't.
You think that's even a possibility? Like,
I think so. I mean, look, the player that Nick Chubb is, it'll obviously depend on if he's still a Brown and what the Browns' backfield looks like. But like,
it's still just Jerome Ford, you got to think it would be at the very least like late first round, I'd think.
Oh, you're saying still earlier? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I think he might go earlier. He's still Nick Chubb, and people are gonna say Nick Chubb. I agree with you that I probably wouldn't take him there, but I think that's going to be a serious dilemma people are going to have to face, whether or not that they want someone like that. And God forbid no one else gets hurt here.
Yeah.
Before, because that would, before the end of the season, because that would throw a wrench into things as well. But
I mean, the injuries are absolutely piling up, so fingers crossed that we don't get anything, too significant that lingers into next season. So, look, again, the overarching lesson here is play it safe. The sub lesson, not picking players coming off injury, not picking players coming off suspension. Second sub lesson, target youth. There were guys that had age concerns this year, and pretty much all of them transpired into being something negative for their production. You had Travis Kelce. I mentioned before the year started that I wasn't really in on him as a first-round pick because I would rather be a year too early getting off the Travis Kelce boat than a year too late, because I don't want to succumb to a guy, being bad because of injury. And there are obviously other factors at play with Travis Kelce as well. The Chiefs not having any other receivers worth a damn except Rashee Rice, who's coming on here in the last couple of weeks, and just the Chiefs offense as a whole being slower. But look, Kelce's age does seem to be a factor as well, from not being able to recover from these lingering injuries and just being, it seems, a step behind what he used to be. He dropped a ball this past week that should have been a touchdown. Like, Kyle Duggar was coming at him, ready to hit him, but still, it's a ball that Travis Kelce last year catches. And I just find it hard to believe that another year of age under his belt isn't part of what's affecting him. So you've got Travis Kelce, who age is affecting him. Derrick Henry is one we talked about. Age is absolutely affecting him. I mean, he just had arguably a career worst day against the Texans. Pat, people before the season were looking at Derrick Henry's fantasy playoff schedule as reasoning to draft him. Like, that was a large reason for people picking this guy in fantasy. And then we get to this point, and he looks like dust, and it's not good. He himself has even questioned his own future in Tennessee.
Yeah, he looked horrible. Like, obviously Tyjae Spears didn't do a whole lot with his touches either, but what was his final stat line? Wasn't it like 16 for 9 or something like that?
It must have been. I mean, I know it was like, I think he had 3 fantasy points, I want to say. If even that. Let me see here. Player stats, Titans, Derrick Henry. Oh my God, it was 16 carries for 9 yards and 4 catches for 1 yard. Oh my God. I didn't know it was that bad.
That's miserable, dude. That's horrible.
Against the Texans. And again, the Texans are a better team this year than they have been in the past, but like, it's a team he normally runs over.
Well, and the thing too, it was a Case Keenum-led Texans. Excuse me. The game script was more in his favor than you thought. Had it been with,
it was a field goal fest.
The Texans at full strength, you'd be like, oh shit, this is gonna be, they're gonna script him out. But this game was close. Like, this should have been a game where he could have put up a bigger day. But absolutely brutal here. Our boy Gandhi in the chat says he might start Trey McBride over him. I think you absolutely should. Honestly, I don't even know if that's like I'm not even thinking too much about that.
Yeah. It seems like, Henry's kind of chalking up the season, potentially chalking up his career as a Titan and moving on. He kind of acknowledged after the game that, it looks like it's going to be Tyjae Spears' season next season, with a kind of a new look, rebuilt Titans team, which it absolutely needs to be. They need to lean into their youth next year. I don't know why they didn't do it a little more this year, but that's just kind of where they're at. And then Austin Eckler, friend of the show, as we know, noted, esteemed off the bench guest Austin Eckler. Look, I hope he has a bounce-back season next year. Obviously, genuinely good dude. Could not thank him enough for what he's done for this show and for our viewership. But this has been an absolute disaster, throwaway year for Eckler. And I think part of that, again, is probably age contributing to his inability to recover from injuries. He's got a career worst yards per carry. He already wasn't a super effective, on the ground runner to begin with, but that part of his game has been just doused. And now he finds himself in a committee backfield on a Chargers team that is in complete shambles all around, which we'll talk about in a second. Their coaching
that's
change.
The thing too, is that offense has been so underwhelming. Even at full strength, that offense has not been nearly as good as we all made it out to be. But a friend texted me on Thursday night and said, Pat called Austin Eckler touchdown dependent, and he took that personal and then became exclusively touchdown dependent.
Yeah, literally. He needs a touchdown to be anything relevant in your lineup.
Is he bust of the year? Maybe he...
It's arguable. Bust of the year, I am more inclined to give it to somebody who wasn't exclusively fighting through injuries. Like, yes, obviously
True.
that's like if you play a lot of games and you're banged up, yes, that is worse than just missing the season due to injury. I'm more inclined to give bust of the year to somebody like, I don't know, maybe like a Miles Sanders who has just completely disintegrated. Like,
Yeah,
obviously
that man is
a
not
much later
worthy of
ADP by a
fantasy
couple
rosters
rounds,
at all,
but
yeah.
like he's disappeared. Najee Harris has been a non-factor most. We'll get to that. That'll be a season wrap-up thing where we can give each of our bust of the year and breakout of the year and all that. That'll be a fun show. But we are still in the season for now, and for the folks out there with Austin Eckler, if you are somehow still alive in your playoffs, you're in a tough spot with Mr. Eckler due to age. And again, that like. I made a cameo for somebody earlier today who he sent me, or like his parents sent me what his lineup was this year in fantasy. He was like, oh yeah, my son drafted these players and you can roast him for it or whatever. And it was like a bunch of old guys. So I said to him, I was like, let's inject some youth into there next year. And that's my lesson here is like, there's so many young players who are either in their prime or just entering their prime. As far as early round picks are concerned, if you're over 27, like I'm probably out, to be honest with you. Like like first round, definitely for the first round. If you're over 27, I'm all set. Second round, we can start to talk because then we're getting into like the Stephon Diggses of the world who still have plenty left in the tank. But in general, like I'm leaning youth. There's too much youth to risk falling into the season that a guy falls off due to age. There's no reason to risk it.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that some of the veterans are safer. Like for, like you said, Stephon Diggs, who turned out to not be all that safe. But like Mark Andrews, a Tyreek Hill, for God's sake. Like, sometimes the veterans are a little safer. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk specifically about Henry, about age, and this being, kind of his fall off season. And like you mentioned, teams that have Austin Eckler, and I think the same is true for Derrick Henry at this point. We talked about last week, like, if you have Saquon Barkley, like, you kind of got to start him. I don't think Henry and Eckler are in that anymore.
No,
like,
not with the state of their teams.
If you have a better option, then I think it's more than justifiable to keep those two on the bench. You're playing for a fantasy championship, and it's not just like, oh, a couple of bad games, they'll bounce back. There's no indication of that. There is no like indicator of when these guys like, oh, great matchup. These guys might have big games, but there is no indicator to lead to that. So if you have a better option that's safer, like fucking Trey McBride, Jesus, who would have thought?
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, we're talking about that, but we're going to talk about some guys who've had huge weeks. Like, I think it's justifiable to start some of those guys rather than Eckler or Henry.
Yeah, the ceiling for guys like Henry and Eckler seems to not only be much lower than it once was, but a lot further away. Like these ceiling games, it would be genuinely shocking to see one of these guys rip off like 120-yard, 2 or 3 touchdown day. That's just based on what they've done this season. Even though their name makes you think they're still capable of that, we just haven't seen performances like that consistent enough this year, or hardly at all, to where you feel great about them in your lineup. So yeah, there are plenty of teams out there, I'm sure, with better options than them. And Pat, you say, who would have thought, considering a guy like Trey McBride over Derrick Henry. That goes along with my third and final lesson, which is something that is super important to keep in mind now because it's going to feel a lot less, it's going to resonate a lot less as next fantasy season gets closer. Narratives are going to develop from fantasy analysts, from just the world around you, that are going to feel like fact. Remember, nothing is fact when it comes to fantasy football. Absolutely nothing. Do not be afraid to go against conventional wisdom. Do not be afraid to look at rankings and think, this looks fucked up. I don't agree with this. If you do enough of your own research and listen to enough different people, or just, not even listen to people because that's where the narratives largely come from, but educate yourself, and you feel free to have opinions that differ from the conventional draft boards, even if like everyone says that it should be a certain way. Because like it just drives me nuts that it feels crazy in the 3rd round to take a guy who is ranked in the 5th round. Like, again, this year, everyone in the 3rd round, basically every 3rd round pick was a bust. And so if you reached outside of that because of your own opinions or something, you are a lot happier than everybody who went with conventional wisdom in the 3rd round. And again, you can't predict the future. Nothing is perfect, but just don't remember the chaos of this season, I guess is the lesson. Remember how things don't always pan out the way we expect, and don't be afraid that if you feel like it's the right move to go a little off the board next year. The narratives are not fact, even though for the next several months after the season end, narratives is all we're going to have.
Yeah, and it even holds true in our league. the guy that took down Brandon, my cousin Austin. Austin, if you're listening,
Yes.
thanks for listening. Like he drafted like Travis Etienne in the second round, and everyone kind of just like glanced at each other, and then he took James Conner in the third, and everyone was kind of just glancing at each other. Well, he's been consistently, I believe he was the second highest scorer in the league, and then made the playoffs and is now in the championship. So again, like what you may think will happen.
All of us think we're getting steals in the third round with like Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, Calvin Ridley, and this dude over here takes James Conner, and we're like, what the fuck are you doing? He's the only one happy right now. Like, yes, Conner missed a large stretch with injury, but now he's back to the workhorse back right in time for the playoffs. He had a good couple weeks early. Like, don't be afraid to go off the board if you think it's the right pick, especially if you don't think that player is going to get around you in the next round. Absolutely take them then. Like, do not worry about it.
Yeah, and honestly, that kind of plays well into my lesson. And my lesson is basically like, I had a journalism professor in college. Shout out Steve. No shot that guy's listening. But he used to say, go in with a plan and get ready to be ready to blow up the plan. If you go into you can't go into a draft and say, I'm going to take this guy, this guy, this guy. I know you and our friend Dan used to be huge victims of that back in the day. You guys would
100%.
map out your entire draft.
We over-mocked. We over-mocked
16
for
rounds.
sure.
I did 0 mock drafts into this year, and I drafted an 8-5 team. Like for example, did I go into this draft planning to do 0 RB? No. Like I knew it was a real possibility at the 12th pick, the way running backs fly off the board in a non-PPR league especially. But I went into that thinking like, okay, maybe I could get a guy like Tony Pollard or maybe this. And then it didn't happen. And then same thing at the 3-4 turn. There was nobody. I remember it was like J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, thank God. And at that point, I said to myself, like, I could take these running backs just to fill a space, or I can take the best players available, guys that I think are really going to do well, and worry about it later. And I did, and it worked. And it worked. So I think the main lesson there is just, don't pigeonhole yourself into a certain strategy. Like, am I going to go into next year being like, 0 RB worked great for me last year, so I'm doing it again? Hell no. Hell no. But if it comes to that again, I'll do it again. Like, I'll do it again. And the other thing, like, the biggest thing I learned this year, 0 RB can work. It can really work. But the thing is, it's so much luck. It is so much luck. Like, I got so lucky this year. The way everything fell together that one, Isaiah Pacheco and David Montgomery had fantastic years. Obviously, Montgomery missed some time, but they were fantastic in the 5-6 turn for me. And it worked out that I picked literally possibly the best player in fantasy this year in Tyreek Hill at the 12th overall pick.
Yep.
And it was also wildly lucky that I had the 12th pick and the first waiver claim, and I was the one that came away with Puka after week 1, and I was able to do that and turn Devontae Smith into a suspended Jonathan Taylor and Gus Edwards. Yeah. Who, as we know, for a while tore things up, and unfortunately I think he's going to start tearing things up again for the rest of the playoffs.
Because somebody else tore something up.
Everything fell into place for me so perfectly. But like, what if that doesn't happen? What if the running backs you draft in the 5th and 6th round are Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins? A guy that gets benched and traded, and a guy that tears his ACL or Achilles. You're fucked. Like, you're starting Kenneth Gainwell and Zach Charbonnet every week. You may be loaded everywhere else, but like, so that's the way I saw it. Was just that everything fell into place for me so perfectly that I was able to parlay 0 running backs into at one point having 4 very startable running backs. But I just got incredibly lucky. But it shows that there are multiple ways you can approach a fantasy draft, and I had a blast this year because of that. Like, this was the most year where I actually felt like a commissioner. Like, I was out there wheeling and dealing, making calculated moves as to just kind of throwing caution to the wind. But at the same time, it's not really 0 RB because it's like 0 everybody this year. Like, it was more so, wasn't really positions, but there were a lot of first-round picks. We mentioned Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard underwhelmed, Nick Chubb gets hurt, Travis Kelce underwhelms.
The first round was a bloodbath outside of like CMC and Tyreek.
That's what I'm saying. So like, there's 0 RB, but you can't. So like, the 0 RB people can't be like, oh well, look what we did, ha ha ha, Kyron Williams, all this shit. Like, everybody stunk. Like, it was it was just such a shit show for those early picks. But like, But yeah, don't go into it with a certain plan in place. And, have fun with it. Like I said, if you go for something wild, have fun with it. I was getting people were laughing their asses off at my team when I had Montgomery and Pacheco.
Literally, we were laughing. It was really funny.
Granted, I believe my third running back I took, I think, was Tank Bigsby.
Pat, I will never, ever, ever forget.
Oh, no.
I think after the Tank Bigsby. No, I'm not going to out you for the other thing. But I think after the Tank
I'll
Bigsby
out myself
pick,
for the other thing. But
okay.
Go ahead.
I think after the Tank Bigsby pick, you just look at your little paper you have in your hand with your roster, and you just look at us and you go, "My team fucking sucks," and we all die laughing.
Well, because before I said that, I'll absolutely out myself for this.
Okay.
I went to go take like a fucking antacid pill, like a fucking Pepsid. And I realized that I had an extra Pepsid and I was missing one antidepressant. So I'm like, guys, I think I took 2 antidepressants. So we're all pissing ourselves, and then I just go, man, my team fucking sucks. Oh, there were 2 guys in our league. They were laughing for genuinely 15 minutes. It was that's gonna go down as an all-time. But the point is I took Tank Bigsby, I took Elijah Mitchell, I was throwing darts and they all fucking missed. So
the early ones hit though. That's what matters.
But the other thing is, if you miss, you can still pull. There's still so many things you can do to get around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let that be one little bonus lesson for you, lesson for you guys. Do live drafts if you can. If you have a close enough league and you can swing it, don't let live drafts be a dying breed. Our league thankfully makes it an event every year. We get at least 7 or 8 people to show up in person. The other, generally all 4, end up being, on Zoom for it, and it's a great time. Do a live draft. You will create moments like that, and you will just have a much better time and a much more fun league. So can't recommend it enough, because that is a memory. We have several memories from live drafts, that one included, that are just iconic and will live on forever. And you guys can create those too if you do the same thing. Then Rodney White tried to take Roddy White 6 rounds after he was drafted and pronounced it Rodney. That's our boy Brett, who may or may not be listening. He's usually listening. So yes. Those are our lessons. Those are our lessons for the season. Again, we will do more a bigger fantasy wrap up once the season is actually over for all of you listening. But for many of you listening, I'm sure you are still alive. Hopefully, including with our advice. Yeah, that's true. Hopefully, with our advice, you have made it to your fantasy championship or are still alive in your playoffs in some respect. And so we want to give you guys some more advice and, obviously talk about the news and the notes around the league as we finish out this here regular season. But first, Pat, let's get to the news.
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy, and this is what's happening in your world tonight.
All right, so the first thing... just a couple days after our last podcast episode, Pat, we had Raiders-Chargers on Thursday Night Football. Your you missed out. Your Las Vegas Raiders hung 63 on the Chargers, and Bran and Staley finally, mercifully got fired.
Almost literally 0 to 100 for the Raiders in a 5-day span. I actually was not watching that game, so every time I looked at the score, just my jaw dropped further to the ground. I knew the Chargers are ass, but the Raiders, even their defense has been solid under Antonio Pierce, but that offense has been pedestrian at best or shutout worthy at worst. And then I will say, after the game, when someone asked Brandon Staley, should you be the coach tomorrow? What the hell do you think he's going to say? Could you imagine a coach saying no?
No, I'm actually going to hand in my resignation before I leave the stadium.
That's basically just such a trap question, because either the guy's going to say no and look like a complete, guy with no confidence, or he's going to say yes, get fired the next day and look like a complete jackass. So that question was a bit leading, and I'm not a huge fan of that, but this has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
I was of the belief that after the playoff collapse last year that he should have been fired.
Agreed.
Because one, he's a defensive guy, and that defense has not really been very good under him at all. They've got Khalil Mack, you've got Joey Bosa, you've got Derwin James, but I think that's the bigger problem, though, is that has a team been more ravaged by injury the last few years than the Chargers? Maybe the Ravens are the first one that pops into my head as well. And I saw a tweet that said oh, of course the Chargers are a great GM spot. Like, all their players are old and past their prime and extremely expensive. Your quarterback is the second highest paid in the league, and we're not really sure if he deserves that yet. And you're $40 million over the cap.
Yeah.
That is going to be quite the situation for the new GM and the new head coach. But that said, Justin Herbert alone, the potential there, makes that probably the most enticing spot for head coach candidates. Obviously, I'm sure we'll have more, but unless there's a wildly surprising coaching change, this is going to be the best landing spot for a coach.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with the Chargers, and I will say, yes, it was a stupid question to ask Brandon Staley if he feels like he deserves to be the coach, but Brandon Staley did not need to further dig his own grave by saying, I don't remember if this is in response to that question, but he basically said of the Raiders scoring 63 points, like, these games could happen to anyone. Brandon, I don't think more than a handful of teams have ever scored that many points. And this is a couple weeks after you got so defensive about calling the defense and saying, you don't have to ask that question. Buddy, I mean, just like, take your lumps. Obviously, he got fired anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But, like, just say it was embarrassing. Don't try to justify and be like, oh, these games happen. No, the fuck they don't. Not with any regularity.
Like, it happened when the Dolphins put a 70 spot on.
Right, yeah.
That happens. That's an elite offense having an elite day.
This is not Aiden O'Connell.
Quite literally got shut out a week ago. Granted, against a pretty good Vikings defense, but you don't get shut out in the NFL anymore. Yeah. But to go from 0 to 63 in a week is embarrassing.
Yeah, Sean Payton,
Zamir White and Trey Tucker, like, they don't even have their second best player on offense. They have, they don't have a strong starting quarterback. Just Devontae Adams and a bunch of warm bodies, and they drop 63 points.
Yeah, Sean Payton getting diced up by Tyreek Hill and company in his first year trying to take over the Broncos is a lot different than Brandon Staley in his whateverth year with the Chargers getting destroyed by Aiden O'Connell and Trey Tucker. Like, it is apples to oranges, and it was bad. So yeah, Brandon Staley absolutely deserved to be fired. From a fantasy perspective, Pat, I don't really know what this means for the Chargers players. I don't think it at this point. I don't know if you're starting any Chargers players because Keenan Allen is still. Who? Jiff Smith. It's pronounced Jiff.
Is it Jiff?
No, I'm kidding. I'm making a joke on the GIF argument.
Yeah.
But no,
I'm not convinced he's real.
And JoJo Wood in the new GM. Yeah, I don't know that if Keenan Allen misses with injury, if he misses another game or maybe the rest of the season, I don't know that you're starting any Charger because we already talked about Austin Eckler being such a difficult player to start. Then you go beyond those guys. I mean, I guess Josh Palmer as a volume play, he was pretty solid on my bench, but like if it's just such a gross situation here with the Chargers that, if you're out there playing in a fantasy championship and there's so much influx now in LA, I'm probably there's no player that I'm really willing to sell out for in this situation and feel like is a bankable player to go after. So I'm not a fan.
I do think Keenan Allen is that guy, but like you said, he didn't
if
practice
he's healthy,
today.
Yeah.
He didn't practice today, so there's a real chance that he misses again. But if he's out, you can't feasibly start anybody because the only guys that were really on the fantasy radar are out. Justin Herbert and Mike Williams. You're stuck with Austin Eckler, and we just talked about that he is no longer a lineup lock. He no longer justifies that. So, but you think if Keenan Allen does play, you got to start Keenan Allen because that's his thing, is being the security blanket, the target monster, especially in PPR leagues. A guy like Easton Stick needs Keenan Allen. He needs Keenan Allen. So, but as of right now, the recording of this on Tuesday night, I'd assume Keenan Allen does not play. So yeah, you avoid that team at all costs. And who do they even play this week? Because target that defense. God, I'm so bad at remembering these schedules.
Yeah, no, with me getting eliminated,
Buffalo.
I have not been.
God. Yeah, well, you're starting Buffalo's defense most likely anyway. So really hammer that.
Yeah, so Brandon Staley officially out as Chargers head coach will certainly be one of the narratives to follow in the offseason. Who ends up taking over this offense? What happens to Kellen Moore? A lot of questions need to be answered. Just thinking about it, Pat, preliminarily, what other coaches are likely to be fired? I mean, I think we're looking at so let's see. Brandon Staley's joining Josh McDaniels and Frank Reich in the unemployment line, along with assistant coaches like Matt Canada and Who's the defensive coordinator that got fired? Don't remember. Doesn't matter.
Ken Dorsey got fired.
Yes,
the Bills
thank you.
offensive coordinator.
Thank you. That
also,
was it.
Shout out Matt Patricia. He's slimmed down a bit. Good for him. He looks good.
The black will help. The black is very slimming. But yes, other coaches that are probably going to get fired or at least have a good chance to get fired. I think we're looking at our boy Arthur Smith. His time's probably coming to an end. We'll talk about him in a second. We've also got, Bill Belichick probably on his way out. Mike Tomlin might be on the hot seat.
Mike Tomlin.
There's some really big names, not Arthur Smith. So there's some really big names here that could be entering the coaching free agency market.
I was talking to my dad the other day. I said, could all 4 NFC South coaches get fired? I think it's more than justable for Dennis Allen to get fired, especially if they don't win the division, which it still seems like it's Tampa's or Atlanta's. Like New Orleans seems like the number 3 option there. And Dennis Allen has done nothing there. And Todd Bowles has really not done anything there to carry out what Bruce Arians had got there. Granted, a lot of older players and things like that. But I don't think it's necessarily going to happen, but I think it is a possibility that we have an entire new division of rookie head coaches, but at least first-year head coaches with that team.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dennis Allen's all but gone. I think Arthur Smith, barring, winning the last 3 games, is all but gone. Todd Bowles probably has the best chance to stick, but again, he's such an uninspiring option that it's like, even if they win the division, I think if they get bounced in the first round, which whoever wins this division is likely to get bounced in the first round, I totally agree with you. We could see a clean sweep of the NFC South and get some new faces in there, which would be nice.
Also, obviously, Matt Eberflus. I mean, it depends. Like, do you think that he could be the guy with Caleb Williams presumably being there next year? Or, do you think it's more of a Justin Fields problem? But probably not. Like, I think you should probably just start completely clean. With Caleb Williams here, and I just had another one on the top of my head, and it just skipped my mind. Oh God, shit.
There are quite a few coaches that are feasibly about to get fired this offseason. So let's take a look here. I'm sure it'll come to our heads if we look at it.
Robert Saleh. That's who I was thinking of.
Okay.
I think Robert Saleh will probably get another shot with Aaron Rodgers next year. I think he'll get a shot to carry out what they were planning on doing this year. But I think next year is a humongous make or break year. And I think Brian Dable probably gets another shot. And
I do too, yeah.
I think he should. I wouldn't blame them. They've been terrible, but I wouldn't blame them if they did get rid of him. But I think they should hang on to him, give him another shot. Plus he's handsome.
Getting rid of Brian Daboll would feel a lot like when the Dolphins got rid of Brian Flores, like a year after he significantly overachieved. Like, I think that's what Daboll did last year with Daniel Jones. He overachieved. So don't fire him now just because they came back down to earth when the roster is just not that good. The last, I think, auto fire is Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera's halfway out the door right now.
That was the face I just made because I was going through and I'm like, oh dear.
He's packing his bags already. That the Commanders need a clean sweep of everything, including their uniforms and branding, if you ask me. So the Commanders, they'll be looking for a head coach for sure. Okay, one of those coaches, Pat, that we just mentioned, Arthur Smith. Now, obviously a very fantasy relevant, a very fantasy contentious head coach, and we need to talk about him because he put together a disaster class here. It was Arthur Smith vintage classic performance out of him.
Like, we're gonna have highlight reels of this.
He's gonna have a hoop mixtape that just makes me want to vomit. After several weeks of us giving him some credit for getting Bijan more involved, getting Drake London and Kyle Pitts more involved, coming off of probably their most well-rounded offensive game at least from a box score perspective against the Bucs last week. Obviously, they did ultimately lose that game, but it was still an effective use of the weapons despite Desmond Ridder being a bum. This week, we have just a complete 180. Tyler Algier has 16 touches in that game against the Panthers. Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London had 13 touches combined. Incredible mismanagement of personnel that he has somehow fallen back into. And look, I know the game was rainy. It was disgusting. That might lend itself more toward running the ball, and especially running the ball with somebody who his game isn't predicated on quick cuts that you can't necessarily make in those type of conditions. But nonetheless, Bijan Robinson still needs to be in at least a 50-50 split with Algier, and they needed to throw the ball a little bit more to just keep themselves in that game. Instead, Arthur Smith does not use his best players and falls to the Carolina Panthers in the process.
That's the biggest thing about this.
This game, I think, cost Arthur Smith his job, just not yet. It'll be at the end of the year.
If they win this game, he can still say that, hey, who cares? We won.
Right.
But you lost to the worst team in football by a good margin, by the way. Like, they are considerably the worst team in football.
Yes.
And, fortunately, at this point, I hope to God people weren't starting Drake London and Kyle Pitts because they're too inconsistent. I don't own them in anything, but, like, if I did, I would have learned my lesson by now. But, I think the common denominator here, you got bounced. In my two teams that got bounced here, all had Bijan Robinson in the starting lineup. We were counting on Bijan Robinson. He was one of your league winners, and everything was looking good, and then just inexplicable. What, Cordero Patterson, why is he getting touches? 5 carries for -2 yards. Derrick Henry looking ass. That's just... Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith's been okay this year, but that's just because Arthur Smith has a genuine fetish for him.
Yeah.
I think he's got dirt on him or something. He absolutely needs to go because they're not winning in the most winnable division in football. Again, by a lot.
Yeah, are the Falcons the most talented roster in that division? I think they certainly have an argument for it top to bottom. They are just not used effectively at all. And don't get me wrong, I know Desmond Ridder is bad, and there's nothing Arthur Smith can do about that, but there needs to be a little bit more consistency from a usage perspective of the weapons around Desmond Ridder that can help maximize, what little potential he may have. Because this is a team that can win this division, but now it's looking like a team that is not going to. So I think Arthur Smith is probably done. They're going to let him finish out the year most likely, because if they weren't, I think he would have been fired right after that game. But he has survived. Yeah. They'll let him finish out the year, but I think it is the end of the line for Arthur Smith. And as far as owning Falcons players now, if you own Bijan Robinson and you're still alive, you still start him, but
unless your team's just loaded.
Yeah, your team would have to be really loaded. I don't think Bijan Robinson is in that Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler tier of he's Agreed. Not a startable player. We've seen Bijan kind of bottom out before this year and then rebound pretty well right after. But you're definitely not feeling as good. I mentioned how Derrick Henry, people's reasoning for drafting him, some of them was because of his playoff schedule. My reasoning for trading for Bijan was largely this Carolina Panthers matchup. When I traded for him, I was like, cool, that'll be great to have in the fantasy playoffs. And then this happened. So just classic Arthur Smith, absolute mess there. And Pat, Arthur Smith feels like a guy who, really wants the fantasy community's attention, for better or for worse. But he is nowhere near the attention whore that our friend Aaron Rodgers is. So
you thought I was mad last week about the Chiefs. I have not remembered disliking an athlete as strongly as I dislike Aaron Rodgers right now. Mm-hmm. And the dude was always kind of just been just kind of like a douchebag vibes, doesn't talk to his family. Obviously, we don't know the details there, so I don't want to really hit him for that. But for whatever reason, this guy just thinks he's the most important person in the world and that everybody needs to hear everything he says. He goes through the whole immunization thing, the whole darkness retreat, the whole will he, won't he play. And now his newest thing today was on Pat McAfee, as he goes on and gets paid to go on every week, I'm not coming back this year. He had to squash the notion, the narrative. My brother in Christ, the only reason this was even a discussion is because you said it. Nobody would have expected a thing. You rupture your Achilles, you're done for the year. Nobody in the world would say maybe if they make a deep playoff run. No, you were the one that said that. And then you're saying, I'm listening, I'm getting my legs rubbed with peanut butter while I'm listening to dolphin noises or whatever the fuck you said. And now he's like, of course I'm not coming back. What are you talking about? They opened your IR window and all this and everything.
Yeah.
this was just all to keep his name in the spotlight. Like, this man absolutely Dutch ovens himself in the middle of the night because he just loves to smell his own farts. Like, I've never seen someone, a phenomenal quarterback, surefire Hall of Famer, probably should have more than one Super Bowl at this point if you really want to talk about him amongst some of the elites, but that's not true, Dan Marino, but sorry. But I'm getting off track there. But a fantastic quarterback, Hall of Famer, but like, no, like, it just the thing that gets me mad is how then he has to spin everything onto someone else. The whole immunization thing. Oh, well, the media, blew that out of proportion. Motherfucker, you lied. Like, you just flat out lied to them. Of course, when they found out that you lied to them, they're going to say something about it.
Yeah.
And now this saying how, this narrative got pushed. It's like, you are the author of your own fate right now. Everything is happening to you is because of you. And I'm just curious now what he's going to do. Maybe he'll say oh, maybe I'll retire in the offseason. What his plan is going to be this offseason to keep his name in the limelight. But God, I don't really dislike athletes a lot, even on teams that I don't like. Like, I've never been the guy to I'm a diehard Yankee fan. I love David Ortiz. Like, I've never been the guy to just hate the best player on another team. So I don't really hate a lot of athletes. God, I hate Aaron Rodgers.
Very few athletes give you as good of a reason to hate them as Aaron Rodgers does. Like, not a lot of athletes give you, enough of an insight into their personality or their opinions for you to have a true basis to hate them, other than just, oh, he's really good and plays for a team I don't like. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers is a very hateable person and player. I hate to say that, but he absolutely is. Yeah, it's not a surprise that he's not playing this year. I will say a report came out today that I think this was another thing he said maybe on the McAfee show, that he envisions himself playing potentially beyond next year. So it doesn't seem like he's going to play the retirement card, but who knows what he's going to do this offseason to keep his name in the spot. He already pulled the darkness retreat. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll go sit for a week in fucking Guatemalan rainforest
maybe he'll
or
date
something.
Taylor Swift.
Oh, there's a scoop. That'd be something for sure. Hey, or some other celebrity. Maybe he'll date Lizzo. That'd be fun. I would be down for that storyline. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers not playing again. What a fucking shock. Okay, moving on, Pat. Let's address some of the
talk about good stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about some good stuff. Dive into the fantasy stuff here. Massive fantasy performances this week.
What a week!
It was a really good week in terms of scoring.
Some guys who we expected. Some guys who are startable guys, some guys on your bench that popped off, and then Trey Tucker. So there's just all over the map here on just near 20-point performances.
Yeah, so the first note we have here, we have a list of all the players who popped off. You just put every important player on the Lions, which I think is an accurate description. David
Montgomery was mid, and he still had 10, I believe he had 10 points, which isn't awful, not good, but not awful. Thank God, because I'm in a 16-team league, and I was talking about how, all I had was Jared Goff, and my best option was Nick Mullins, and I said to myself, fuck it, we've seen Goff do it. Nick Mullins is more of a vibes pick, the vibes, whatever, but
hoping
Jared
he does
Goff,
a Jake
we've
Browning,
seen him do it. They've shown to be a really high-level offense at points, especially at home. And thank God I did that, because I'd be sitting on the couch in that league, too, had I went with Nick Mullins, but for him to have the game he had, and then the one that impressed me the most is I believe I had it originally before I put every line, but Jahmyr M.F. and Gibbs he's not even arrived. He's been here.
Yeah, he looks great. He looks incredible, and he's a guy. Where do you think his ADP is next year? You think he's a first?
Very close, if not.
Yeah, maybe one of those late
second
first, early second type of guys. Yeah, for sure. All the Lions popped off. Got to give a shout out to my boy Sam Laporta. This is what I always strive for in fantasy football. I mentioned this last week, is just to be able to care about my team for as long as possible. Honestly, it was pushing it after last week, how big of a deficit I was facing, that I felt like maybe this week I wouldn't care that much. But after that Lions game, and Sam Laporta gives me 3 touchdowns after Ty Chandler drops 20, I was able to at least have a glimmer of I could maybe do this and enjoy the game Sunday, watch them with some hope, at least for a while. Sam Laporta gave me a lot of that hope, especially with that random touchdown right at the end of the game, which I got up off my couch and yelled when he scored, because I was like, this can't be happening. Yeah. If this actually happens, I am the fucking chosen one. Sadly, didn't finish the job, but Sam Laporta is that guy. Sam Laporta, Pat, might be TE1 next year. He really might be. I mean, he's tight end 1 in terms of scoring right now. Travis Kelce, I believe, has the same points per game, but I'm not taking 35-year-old Travis Kelce over Sam Laporta. I'm not doing it.
The only thing about Sam Laporta, like, that I haven't loved maybe in comparison to some other younger tight ends, is he's been a bit more touchdown dependent, which again, tight end is an incredibly touchdown dependent position. But you look at guys like TJ Hawkinson, Trey McBride, even Dalton Kincaid at one point. Dawson Knox needs to fuck right off. Even a guy like Jake Ferguson, the volume's really good. Like, if they don't score a touchdown, they can still have very easily have a double-digit day. That's the only thing about, I wouldn't even call it a red flag with Sam Laporta. Like, obviously, like, is he tight end 1 the rest of the year? I think it's either him or TJ Hawkinson probably, but Laporta is just in a way better offense.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite pick I made this year, and I made a good amount of late round picks that outproduced their ADP for me, but Sam Laporta, I will remember picking him for the rest of my fantasy career. Next, another player I picked as well, but I didn't start, and it wouldn't have made a difference anyway, so that's okay. Jordan Addison, 29.1 points, 6 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, who saw that coming in Justin Jefferson's first game back? And he did that alongside Ty Chandler, who popped off. I also started him. 23 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown, and then 3 catches for 25 yards. 24.7 points on that Saturday game against the Bengals. What a performance.
Yeah, I mean, Chandler's the better running back in that room. I mean, we've
been
talked
banging
about
that drum all fucking year. Yeah. I mean, god damn it.
Even when Alexander Madison comes back, Madison needs to be the complimentary back to Ty Chandler. And Ty Chandler's a legit 3-down back. I mean, that was going to be his whole thing before, Cam Akers came into the picture. It was like he's going to be the 3rd down back. But it's clear he could do it on early downs as well. But huge game from Jordan Addison. No one was probably starting him, and rightfully so, just because he's just completely disappeared even without Justin Jefferson. And I still don't think you can start Jordan Addison, even, with Nick Mullins, just because it's too risky. And again, similar to Josh Palmer, who, had 4 catches and one of them was a huge touchdown, a little dependent on the deep ball. We're at the point in fantasy seasons where splitting a hair like that might be the ultimate difference. And that's the only reason why, if I was a Jordan Addison owner, I probably still wouldn't be rushing to put him in my lineup. But Ty Chandler, absolutely.
Yeah, Ty Chandler should be in probably most lineups, at least as a flex for the rest of the season. Pat, I included this one because he's just that fucking guy. I mean, it's Christian McCaffrey, 18 carries, 115 yards and a touchdown. I figured that one
without saying.
5 catches, 72 yards and 2 touchdowns, 41.7 points. Like, I'm just glad he's continuing to do this now and just continuing to dispel the whole McCaffrey's injury-prone label. People hopefully realizing now that that's just a risk all running backs face, and he got unlucky for a little bit. But Christian McCaffrey is the best fantasy player or best fantasy asset in fantasy football, and is probably your consensus 101 next year, as he should be. And if you've got him,
and as he should have been this year.
As he should have been this year, and you are probably riding him to a fantasy title if you've put together any sort of competent team around him. He's just an absolute monster. Yeah. Yeah, true. How did the Christian McCaffrey owner in our league not make the playoffs, guys? That is a question we will never fully understand.
Playoffs. I think he was second to last. Sorry.
He was the worst. Yeah, he was one of the worst teams in the league.
Here if he's listening.
It was just McCaffrey and nobody else on his roster. RIP. Okay, James Cook, Pat. Now this is one that I mean, I had James Cook for a while, ended up trading him in a deal for Bijan Robinson, which, if I could go back, I guess I wouldn't do now. I mean, it wouldn't make a difference either way. I'd still would have lost, I think. But James Cook popping off, and it has all coincided with Joe Brady calling plays for the Bills. Apparently, Joe Brady's able to identify something that Ken Dorsey could not, which is that James Cook is good and should get touches. And he responded with that to that confidence by going 25 carries, 179 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches, 42 yards and a touchdown, 36.1 points. I never saw this coming. I mean, what a monster.
Absolutely. And I saw a quote from Joe Brady today, basically saying how, like, we didn't plan on running that much, but the ground game was so effective that you just do it. And some NFL pundit kind of like tweeted that, like, that's the difference between calling plays and calling a game. Yeah. You could call plays all you want, but to be able to pivot like that the way he did. But yeah, nobody should have ever been getting carries on this team, whether Damian Harris, whether Latavius Murray. Remember Leonard Fournette? Remember that?
I was very sure he would be relevant. He is just not. Cool.
Or even Ty Johnson. So, like, So it should have been James Cook all along, but just for a Bills running back to get 25 carries in a game is insane with how pass heavy that team has been. But they just fucking pumped them, man. Like, two huge wins in a row for them. Like, they're at this rate, you've got to think they're gonna head towards the playoffs. But just massive wins there.
Yeah, James Cook emerging as the season comes to a close, the regular season that is. He'll be an interesting one, Pat, to follow his ADP heading into next year. Because as it stood, I think he would have gone around the same place he did this year, which was like fifth-ish round. But if he puts up, not even 36 points, but if he puts up some more workhorse sort of numbers, we're looking at James Cook as potentially second round, at least early third round pick. I don't know. That'll be a fun one to follow.
We also forgot about Mr. 9/11 himself in coaches that might be on the hot seat.
Yeah, McDermott.
But I know it's been a short tenure, but has Joe Brady coached his way back onto the head coaching radar? He was a sneaky head coach candidate back when he was the offensive coordinator at LSU. Then obviously he was Matt Rule's scapegoat in Carolina, had to settle for the quarterback's coach job in Buffalo, and is now just clearly showing out again in an offensive coordinator role. So especially you look at a team that Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert, like Joe Brady was tied to the I believe that was around the time they hired Brandon Staley. Joe Brady had some hype at that point that he could be the Chargers' next head coach. So,
yeah, that's a good question. I'll be curious because there's going to be a lot of head coaching openings, and so anybody that kind of proves their worth here over the last couple of weeks could definitely be in that mix. Pat, next up we've got Jalen Waddle. Popped off with Tyreek Hill out of the picture for 142 yards and a touchdown, 28.2 points. Against a tough Jets secondary, still impressive, even with Hill out and him being the clear primary option. What a game for Waddle, a guy who's been banged up all year.
It just goes to show, what Tyreek is teased that he's going to retire at the end of his contract. When Jalen Waddle is the number one player in an offense, good Lord. He's going to be putting up, he's going to be a top 10 at worst wide receiver there.
Yeah, Waddle, a guy that I think a lot of people wanted, maybe more work from this season, or at least more production from, and he's maybe delivering on that a little bit late, but at least, better late than never here with Jalen Waddle. David Njoku, Pat, talked about him last week. He popped off. Well, he popped off again he's just been a beast with Joe Flacco. 26.4 points this week, 104 yards and a touchdown. Maybe the most random emergence of a player at the end of the year. He's just kind of been good, okay up to this point, even bad for fantasy purposes. And now he's become TE1 over the last 2 weeks, tight end one. He's been a monster. So shout out to David Njoku. For as long as Flacco's out there, I think you can feel good about starting him.
Absolutely. And a lot of tight end discourse going on with Travis Kelce. Do you start David Njoku over Travis Kelce?
Oof.
It's so crazy that it's even a tough decision. That is insane that it's a tough decision, but not only has Kelce been bad for his own for Kelce's own standards, he's been disastrous. But even for tight end standards, Travis Kelce's just been pretty meh. Yeah. And, we're looking at guys like Sam Laporta, obviously thank God for flex spots, like David Njoku, like Trey McBride. It's because I'm sure are there a lot of Travis Kelce owners in the playoffs still right now? Because he was probably a first or second round pick, and he has not been a first or second round pick value, especially at tight end.
I will say that, not to stroke off our boy Austin too much, but that is another thing that's very impressive about his team. That was his first round pick. That was his first round pick. I mean, look, a lot of other first round picks busted a lot worse than Travis Kelce did, which I'm sure is part of it. But he still has not returned value.
I'm also not allowed to stroke him off. We're related.
I'll leave that one alone. All right, Chris Godwin, 10 catches, 155 yards, no touchdowns, 25.5 fantasy points. I believe he was questionable coming into this game and ended up saying, fuck being questionable. I'm going to go off. Baker Mayfield obviously had a big game that supported Chris Godwin's big game. Just a great performance from him this week. Then, let's see, we've got Terry.
So funny.
Oh, go ahead.
One funny thing about Chris Godwin was that, when Tyreek was out, I had to throw someone into my lineup in the consolation game just for the hell of it. And I threw Chris Godwin in there. And like I said, had I actually made the playoffs and thrown, granted, I probably would have been more active on waivers, different stuff would have happened, but Chris Godwin would have won me a matchup there and advanced me to a championship. So that's what we thought we were going to see from the Bucs, right? That Mike Evans could still kind of exist as this, big play guy, and Chris Godwin could be a guy getting close to, 8-10 catches here and there. And pretty disappointing, but man, For the no one that started him this week. You've been rewarded.
Chris Godwin saving benches across the land from being too barren of points. Okay, Terry McLaurin. Pat, this one's funny to me. 141 yards and a touchdown, 26.1 points. Sam Howell has been a fantasy asset basically all year. I'm not sure if he still is, but for a while he was second in the league in passing yards, and yet somehow he didn't support a single fantasy relevant receiver, like on a consistent basis
Only
all
Brian
season.
Robinson.
And then this week, Sam Howell has one of his worst games of the season. And yet Terry McLaurin puts together a wide receiver one stat line. Nothing on the Commanders makes any sense.
Jacoby Brissett loves him some Terry McLaurin. McLaurin had like a 50-yard touchdown once Brissett came into the game. The thing, though, is with Washington, it's like, what benefit do you get from starting Jacoby Brissett this week? You are 4-10. You are out of it. You need to start your younger player. Like, you need to keep seeing what you have in Sam Howell to, kind of see what you're dealing with, again, for presumably the next GM head coaching regime there. So, like, you think, like, oh, start Brissett for Terry, but realistically, that just isn't going to happen, and I don't think it should.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see Terry finally put up a great stat line. All it took was Jacoby Brissett to come in for garbage time and prop him up a little bit. And then, Pat, we've got Devin Singletary here, who has put together some nice games at the end of the season, but didn't necessarily expect it here with Case Keenum at the helm. Still put up 21 fantasy points. I believe it was about, let me do my math in my head real quick, 170 all-purpose yards. Big game from Singletary once again.
I think it just goes to show that Damian Harris is just bad. Like
Damian Pierce.
We were talking about bust, and then at the end of the preseason, we kind of got sucked into your narrative, like you mentioned there. Like, Damian Pierce looked pretty good, and we were like, oh, maybe we were wrong, but no, we were right. This guy's just not very good, to the point where he's getting shown up by Devin Singletary, who has shown himself to be an okay running back in the NFL. But wild, and shout out Noah Brown as well. Another, we thought this offense was going to be like pedestrian. But maybe it would have been with Davis Mills. Just wild to just pluck Case Keenum out of there. Houston legend, and for that to happen and to win the game, right? I'm not losing it, right?
The Texans won the game. Yes. I think the range, if you went back to the preseason and thought about what the range of outcomes would have to be for Devin Singletary to become a fantasy relevant piece, it's like, okay, the Texans' offense, first of all, has to be good, which nobody expected that at the beginning of the season. The line has to be good. Nobody really expected that, even though they had a couple pieces. And then you need Dameon Pierce to not just underperform, but be objectively pretty terrible. And then Devin Singletary to have some of the best games of his career, including, I know at least he had his career high this year in a game against me. So,
32 carries in a game.
Yeah, Devin Singletary maybe at the very bottom of the list of players I expected to be fantasy relevant at any point this season. So shout out to him for just shattering those expectations. Then we got a couple honorable mentions here. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 20.1 points, and Trey Tucker, 20.7 points. Clyde was probably in an okay number of lineups. Trey Tucker, though, nowhere, not sniffing a fantasy lineup this week.
Yeah,
so shout out to
not
those
even
guys.
Sniffing fantasy benches, even in the deepest leagues.
No.
Who's owning Trey Tucker? But like I said, Brent, I'm in a position where like I'm on the bench and I've got I've got too many players. Basically, I'm at the point where I have too many players. It's like I'm praying for Isaiah Pacheco to come back so I can just drop CEH and McKinnon and get them off my radar. Yeah. Like now I'm sitting here thinking like, what the hell do I do? Like, same thing. Like I've got Zach Moss as well. It's like JT come back. Like something happened here. So like, I don't have to make these tough decisions. Like I'm rooting for guys on my own team to just. I'm praying on their downfalls on my own team, just so I can just clear the way, clear my goddamn head, man.
It does seem like, according to Andy Reid, that Pacheco will be back this week, so you could probably get rid of those guys.
League winner Isaiah Pacheco.
League winner Isaiah Pacheco, just 2 weeks too late. All right, speaking of Pacheco, who is injured, Pat, let's move on to some of the injuries that we are monitoring here as we get to the close of the fantasy regular season and just the NFL regular season. First of all, Jamar Chase has a separated shoulder. He's expected to be out this week and potentially beyond, but at least is out for this week. I keep thinking of the Bengals, Pat, in my head as a team that I'm like mentally eliminating from the playoffs, and I'm like, no, this is a massive loss for a team that is trying to make the playoffs. I keep just feeling like the the Jake Browning Bengals should be out of the picture, and they're not. So this is going to be
Shout
a
out
big
Jake
hit.
Browning, man.
Yeah, he's
great.
playing like a monster. Yeah, this is a big hit for the Bengals. Obviously, a big hit for any fantasy teams out there that are surviving with Jamar Chase. Shout out to you because he's another one that, through honestly things out of his control, has underperformed at least half the time this season. But yeah, Jamar Chase. If you have him, look to make other plans because I don't think he's going to be there for you, at least not in a reliable way. Yeah, for the rest of the fantasy regular season. He's going to at least be out for this week. Pat, then we've got Michael Pittman, a victim of a horrific hit from Demonte KZ. I want to make sure I'm saying that name right, I believe. But either way, he was suspended for the rest of the season, and I believe rightfully so, for a pretty dirty hit on Michael Pittman. And now Pittman,
there were others, though. It doesn't seem like it was exclusive. I believe they said it was like a consistent violation of league conduct or something like that.
Correct. Yeah. Very tough hit on Pittman that has left him in concussion protocol. So question of if he will be available this week. If he is a guy that you are trying to start or are hoping to start, you may need to look at other options. And Pat, I don't think any of those options are going to come from the Colts roster. The receiver breakdown there is just rough right now. Josh Downs is a guy we've talked up in the past, but his targets for whatever reason have dwindled. They've gone 5-3-3 the past 3 weeks, so he is not a guy you can rely on. The other receivers they have, Alec Pierce and DJ Montgomery, who I'll be honest, don't really know who DJ Montgomery is.
There were two players on the Colts this week where, I was sitting there and just like, I genuinely don't know who this is. Like Tyler Goodson.
Yeah.
Genuinely don't know who that is. I
think Tyler Goodson was a Bear briefly. That's the only background I have on him, and I might be wrong.
Let's see.
Let's look up. Let's see whose hunch on Tyler Goodson was right.
Well, I think I looked at his thing. Yeah, he was on the Packers last year. He
never on the Bears?
He came out of Iowa.
Okay, I'm thinking of some other. You know who I'm thinking of? I think I'm thinking of Tyler Irvin from like years ago.
Christ.
Whatever. Random, non-existent person running the ball for the Colts. But yeah, if you have Pittman, you're not replacing him with a Colt. If you had to, gun to your head, Pat, I think I'm going to go with DJ Montgomery just because he made the biggest play. Did have more targets in his first actual extended action. He had more targets than Josh Downs. So maybe it's one where you ride the wave and see if he can do it again. But otherwise, you likely in 99% of leagues are going to have better options than a Colt to replace Michael Pittman.
The Mo Alley Cox erasure here is disturbing.
Mo Alley Cox, man. I love me some Mo Alley Cox. All right. Couple more players in concussion protocol. We got Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud remaining in concussion protocol. Actually just got an alert that came through just now. It seems like CJ Stroud is going to miss another week, so plan for that however you are. And Trevor Lawrence, he is more TBD, but look, most players, not to speculate, most players that go into concussion protocol do miss a game, but either way, something to monitor throughout the week if you are relying on Trevor. But honestly, even if you are, you probably don't feel great about that.
And the other thing too, like, you could clearly well, obviously there was the big hit where like presumably he got concussed, and even if you didn't know that, he was terrible after that. Like a lot of just terrible misses. Just really, obviously they really weren't in the game to begin with, but he looked considerably worse after this, and it's just amazing how that guy showed zero concussion symptoms to the staff there. I find that really, I mean, granted, again, things can appear later, but I just find that really hard to believe. But he didn't look right, and it suffered. Jacksonville, nobody really, you weren't really happy with anybody unless you started Jamal Agnew. So
that's a funny story because obviously, Pat, in my efforts to come back from an insurmountable deficit in fantasy, I was trying to find the guys that I thought had like the biggest ceilings among receivers. And so at my wide receiver 2 spot, after AJ Brown occupies my number 1, I was thinking I ended up going with Zay Jones over Calvin Ridley because I was like, Zay Jones last year at the end of the year had like a couple of multi-touchdown games. Like, okay, I'm trying to capture lightning in a bottle. But I went with Zay Jones. I was debating between Jones and Calvin Ridley. And of course, the guy who catches the 65-yard touchdown is Jamal Agnew. Again, one of those wasn't going to be enough. I needed somebody to catch like 2 or 3 of those to have a chance. But yeah, I was just like, that's appropriate. Of course, it's Jamal Agnew. For the longest touchdown pass of Trevor Lawrence's career, by the way, it was Jamal Agnew on the other end of it. But yes, Trevor Lawrence.
A discussion about him at the end of the season.
Trevor Lawrence in concussion protocol. I think, Pat, to once the season ends, we should probably do like a divisional breakdown of like just how the season went for each of these players and talk about some of them, because like
We're gonna need
Trevor
to milk
Lawrence
the content.
Trevor Lawrence is a guy that there needs to be some discussions made, and I think that'll be the best way to go about it, because he has not had the season I wanted him to have. But as of right now, he may not even be playing this week, so keep an eye on that. Pat, this one is not a guy that anybody probably had in their lineups, but still bears mentioning because it sucks. Keaton Mitchell, torn ACL, brutal looking injury. And in response, the Ravens have called up Melvin Gordon. So sick. Don't add Melvin Gordon. Don't do it, just for clarity.
But it's Gus Bus season, baby.
Ugh, God. Yeah.
As gross as it is. Again, granted, actually, Gus had more. It's funny because like Mitchell did start again, and the whole thing last week was like, oh, Mitchell, or 2 weeks ago was, oh, Mitchell started. Oh, Mitchell did this, and it's just like. And then it looked like a little more Gus this week, and now it's going to be a lot of Gus. And again, that's a really good offense with a lot of touchdown potential. I think he's firmly on the flex radar. I don't think he's a lineup lock, but like, do you start Gus? I'd start Gus Edwards over Derrick Henry. I hate to say that.
Ooh,
That
yeah,
makes me want
I
to
think so. I think I would too.
But
I think I would too.
Just from the point that they're both touchdown dependent, and which offense do you trust to be at the 1 yard line more often? I think it's Baltimore by a lot, but it sucks with Keaton Mitchell. You know, we finally started to see something, and now he'll probably have to miss some time next year. Possibly. Well, ACLs are aren't quite as long absences as they used to be. Now sometimes like 10 months, but might miss some time next year too. But yeah, he's a really exciting player. Granted, like 5'8", 185, soaking wet. Like he almost has me dimensions, but nonetheless, an exciting player. Sucks.
Yeah, sucks that we won't see him for quite a while. Some other injury updates. So those were kind of the new injuries of the week outside of Stroud, who's obviously been hurt. But if you guys are looking for a great injury resource on Twitter, I cannot recommend enough at FB Injury Doc. It's Edwin Porras. He has some kind of degree. It's escaping me. Sorry, Doctor of Physical Therapy in pro baseball. He's a medical analyst for Fantasy Points, the website. And he's just been a great asset, for me for a couple years now of talking about player injuries, when they're expected to be back, how much their effectiveness might be sapped by whatever injury they've had. He's been great. He put together a sheet of, players who were injured this week and when they're expected to return. His projected return date, there are a lot of players projected to return in Week 16, this upcoming week. And so those players are Tyreek Hill, Geno Smith, Brian Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, and Zach Moss. Then there are some players who it's up in the air, could be Week 16 or 17. Nico Collins, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Chris Olave, Ramondre Stevenson. So those guys could be back this week, could be back next week. This is just, sort of a tentative return date for each of them. Obviously, Stroud and Lawrence are kind of TBD with the concussions. He has a Week 17 projected return date for Alexander Mattison, Christian Watson, and A.J. Dillon, meaning he expects them to be out this week. And then Kenny Pickett. Who the fuck cares? And then Kenny Pickett, Marquise Brown, and Will Levis are all projected at best Week 17 returns, possibly later or not at all. So yeah, again, a great resource for any injury monitoring you may have to do for fantasy at FB Injury Doc on Twitter. Edwin Porras, DPT. All right. Pat, some waiver wire ads we got to talk about. Now, some of these guys are obviously on rosters already.
A lot of them are contingent on injury.
Yeah, a lot are contingent on injury. Ty Chandler being the one here at the top that I think hopefully is already on rosters in a lot of leagues that know what they're doing because, look, we knew he was going to start this past week. We didn't know how good he would be. I don't think we expected him to be quite this productive. But if he's still on your waiver wire, go get him. Do not let him be there any longer. Yeah, run, don't walk. But these other players are, maybe a little bit more dicey. They're not auto starts like Ty Chandler is, at least as long as Madison is out. But we do have some names on here that are relevant. At the running back position, we've got Zamir White, Chris Rodriguez, Trey Sermon, and Tyler Goodson. Zamir White put together a solid game for the Raiders. I mean, he found the end zone. That's really all you can ask for.
Could have been better. I was honestly getting a little greedy. I started Zamir White in a few leagues at the last minute. I was getting a little greedy, hoping that he would get in the action instead of Brandon Bolden and whoever the hell else. But I feel like out of this bunch, he would be the closest thing to like a must start. You look at Chris Rodriguez, he didn't do shit this week, but he was the lead back. He had 10 carries, I believe, to Antonio Gibson's 4. But as you stated, the fantasy doctor does believe Brian Robinson will be back this week. So I probably wouldn't waste a claim on Chris Rodriguez, but just more so something to monitor. later in the week that he is a starting running back on a football team if someone is out. And then the Colts, like, if there's no Taylor or Zach Moss, that's tough because Trey Sermon, man, good for Trey Sermon. That guy got dragged, and rightfully so, but nice game. 80 yards rushing, but Tyler Goodson was getting a lot of work. It's just the thing, it's like, that feels like too much of a committee to start either of those guys. Obviously, if Zach Moss is playing, you're starting Zach Moss, no question. And those two are just rendered irrelevant again.
Yeah, they were both, their final stat lines were both startable this past week, at least in a flex capacity, but you can't expect, them to have an even workload that are both worth having in your lineup. I think if those are the two lead guys, they're probably both strictly desperation plays, and pick your poison. I'm probably going Sermon just because he did have more touches than Goodson did, but those are just, desperation plays based on some level of opportunity that they're going to have. Then at receiver, Pat, we've got Josh Palmer and Noah Brown. Talked about Palmer. He's going to have Easton Stick as his quarterback, which is a low upside, situation to begin with, but still a decent volume play. He's going to be on the field the entire game. He might be the wide receiver one if Keenan Allen's out, so you could do a lot worse than Palmer. He could squeak out another one of those deep bombs like he did against the Raiders. When that play happened, I was like, man, I guess I should have started him, but still not a super bankable player that you're going to be super confident in. And then Noah Brown.
I think Noah Brown is.
You think so?
Much more. I put a note here, and I mean, at this point in the playoffs, guys, your priority on waiver should be, are you going to start this guy? Like, do you realistically see, it's not in the year. Like, potential isn't really anything because it's here. Like, we're here. So, right. But Noah Brown's a much more bankable player. Even with Case Keenum, I believe he had 8 catches. A really solid day for Noah Brown without Nico Collins, but we even saw him play well before with Nico Collins in the lineup there, obviously with no Tank Dell. And whether it's C.J. Stroud or Case Keenum, it's clear that Case Keenum really likes Noah Brown, probably because they hung out. Well, I don't even know where Case Keenum was. Did they pluck him off the street or something? I didn't even know he was still in the league, honestly.
Yeah, no, Keenum's been on the Texans as sort of a third string QB mentor type of guy.
Nope, didn't have a fucking clue. So
yeah, that's where he's been hanging out.
I think Noah Brown, if I had to rank these guys in terms of startability, I would go Chandler, Zamir White, Noah Brown, and then the rest are just more so hypotheticals. But I'd say those are the three. Noah Brown is also the thing that's keeping me hanging on by a thread in the league winner draft here, is that Noah Brown looked good, and hopefully he'll look good the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I would agree. Noah Brown, definitely the most startable guy, of the receivers at least, but one of the most startable guys you could pick up off waivers. All right, Pat, we will finish things up with our viewer questions.
We just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
This question, what are you looking at? What's that face for?
Go ahead. I have thoughts. Go ahead.
This question coming from Stephen McGowan, 24. Is Patrick Mahomes the biggest bust for fantasy this year?
Stephen, I can't believe you would ask that. This is a Hall of Fame career, and now it's going to be threatened because of this.
Because
the
of
answer
that
is
offsides
maybe.
call. Yeah,
the answer is maybe.
He's up there for sure.
I just think so. Similar to Travis Kelce, it's not like Mahomes. Again, to Mahomes standards, yes. If you are comparing Mahomes' expectations to the bust and no one else, then yes, probably he is the bust of the year. But like Kelce, even just by quarterback standards, he has not been good. No. He has not been the lineup lock that you think you're getting out of Patrick Mahomes. So if you like to go QBs early and you took Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd round, you're pissed. You're pissed, man. But it all depends on where you really took him. But what a bizarre year in Kansas City, and especially when there's no real favorite in the AFC, as opposed to San Francisco being the really surefire favorite in the NFC. The AFC is for the taking, and Kansas City is just not taking it and probably not going to take it.
Yeah.
And who knows why? I saw a great tweet that said that, the clip of Mahomes being really frustrated after a Kadarius Toney drop, by the way. The ref should have told him to catch the ball. But he's in his Donovan McNabb era of Andy Reid, which I thought was really funny there. But just a bizarre, there's really no explanation for why they're just this mid. But hey, they're still in a firm playoff position. We'll see what happens, but just puzzling, and Mahomes is taking the biggest hit.
Mahomes has proven something that we didn't necessarily know about him, which is that he is not situation proof. Like, people were drafting Mahomes like he's going to put up these elite numbers, no matter what his supporting cast is. Well, I think the Chiefs have finally flown a little too close to the sun here with, like, how much can we skimp on our skill players and still get good production from Mahomes and from this offense. This is as low as you can go. Like, you can't have literally no receivers that are above average other than maybe Rashee Rice, who's a rookie, and expect greatness.
Yeah, Nate here in the chat makes a really good point, though, that if you're in a super flex and you drafted Mahomes, you're happy because everybody's hurt. And that's really true.
Yeah.
That this guy has stayed healthy and at least been mid, I guess, like, at worst here. But, yeah, with so many injuries, that's a really valid point.
Yeah, Mahomes is currently QB9 in terms of fantasy points per game.
Sheesh.
But as you mentioned, 3 of the players he's behind are injured. It's Kirk Cousins, C.J. Stroud, and Anthony Richardson. Stroud the only one with a chance of playing again this year. But yeah, that is not what you drafted if you drafted him in even where his ADP was, which was like late second, early third. And in a lot of leagues, as we know, the number one quarterback, or at least Patrick Mahomes, because of the name value, probably went in a lot of like first rounds and early second rounds. And if you drafted him there, your team is struggling. So honestly, just another endorsement for waiting at least a little bit on quarterback, except for maybe Jalen Hurts if the tush push doesn't get banned, because I mean, Jesus Christ, that's just a fucking cheat code when it comes to quarterback fantasy points.
I lost by 2, which I actually that was not intentional, but it brings us to the next question. This is from IBYKOV17 on Instagram there. What is the best way to cope with a marginal loss? I was up 1 when Hurts threw a pick. I'm in a similar boat there where the Hurts tush pushed me right out of the playoffs. And the way I see it is, like, you kind of question everything. Like, you really nickel and dime yourself when you lose by that little of a thing. Like, I should have started this guy. I should have started this guy. And, like, so you start thinking, you basically start retconning your thinking. Like, oh, man, I was thinking about starting this guy when, like, you weren't. All you can really do is take the L, I'm very lucky that, like, I haven't had any of those heartbreaking losses, like, in our league. That really, just very closely knocked me out of a play. Well, actually, I did when the Justin Tucker Lamar pooping game against you, I believe in 2020. That was a tough one, but I mean, really, all you can do is just kind of sulk and just question your existence. And 10 years from now, I'm going to be saying, like, one time in 2020. I almost won in the semis, and had I won, I would have dropped 300 in the championship. So a lot of what ifs for your hypothetical grandkids.
Yeah, all you can do is keep looking forward, keep moving forward. Like, when you lose by so little, you have a tendency to, think it was all luck based and, I wish this happened, I wish that happened. Like, just be honest with yourself and also be kind of analytical. Like, what could you have done better, and what will you do to make sure that, or what can you try to do to make sure that you have a more commanding win next season? And maybe it's nothing. Maybe your team popped off and you lost 251 to 250. At that point, there's not a lot you can do, but try to pick apart any little thing you can improve on. Start thinking about next year. Like, it's going to suck if you lose by 1. It absolutely is. But that's all you can do is keep looking forward and just apply the free time.
That you as well. That's brutal. I've never lost a game like that, where I was winning and then lost based on the merit of my own player rather than, obviously we've had it the other way around, but that has never happened to me before. And I hope it doesn't, because I don't know if I can take that.
Yeah, I agree. That would not be good for the old mental health. But yeah, just keep apply the time that you now have, the free time that you have for not being in your fantasy leagues playoffs anymore. And just, start thinking about next year. What could you have done to have maybe a slightly deeper roster, or be more prepared for the injuries that you suffered that made you lose that game, even though it was by 1 point. Just little things, even if they're not super logical and they wouldn't have helped you like by a ton this year. Just a way to kind of occupy your mind and make you feel like you're doing something to not let something like that happen next year, as much as it sucks, because it is a 1-point loss. There's just not a lot you could do about it, but look for the things that maybe you can. Then this question, Pat, kind of goes along with that. It's the opposite end of the spectrum. I lost in the first round 120-200. Which is worse, a close or not close loss? I think
That's tough.
It depends on the context for me, Pat, because I sit here, right? I got blown out by a similar score in our first round of our playoffs, and I find it a lot easier to move on. But again, I lost in that way because largely due to injuries. Like, I think if I put out the best team I possibly could and they just all decided to bust on the same week, it might be more difficult to accept. But I think not being so close to that glory of making the championship kind of makes it a little bit easier to let go. I personally feel like getting blown out is a little bit easier on the mental than losing by such a small margin.
I think so too, because like, on the other hand, losing by such a small margin, like you're in it, you are invested all the way. Like that's what fantasy football is all about, is building a competitive team. But the heartbreak is just so much worse. Like, because like we talked about the woulda, coulda, shouldas, but when you lose by that much, you really can't woulda, coulda, shoulda yourself. Yeah. Like there's no way that you could have made up 80 points with different lineup decisions. There's just no way. So it will be a little easier on you for sure to cope with that, rather than when you're saying like all these what ifs, like, oh, what if this guy didn't get tackled at the 1, or this guy had a 10-yard catch and it got called back for holding. Like so many things that you can just drive yourself crazy over, rather than like, I'll watch that Justin Tucker field goal in my nightmares for the rest of my life against the Browns that game, because I'm a fantasy football champion if that happens in our league, right. And I'm not, but I've had 4 straight winning seasons, so we're
there you go.
We're climbing up.
There you go. Oh, moving on up. Yeah, I think it's just a little easier if you get blown out. Like, at the same time, it sucks because that means, look, again, it depends. Like, if your team got nuked by injuries like mine did, not to make excuses, but, like, you understand why you got smacked. If your team didn't get nuked by injuries, then you just start to question, okay, why did the team I put together get fucking smoked in the playoffs? Like, that probably means you didn't look close enough at the matchups your players had or stuff like that, and then there's things to improve on. You lose by a little, it feels like there's just not much you can do, and you feel kind of helpless. So that's where I'm at with that one. And then finally, Pat, this question could be for both of us now that we're both out of fantasy this year. Well, I guess you're not, again, in other leagues, but in a couple of weeks, we'll all be done. What are you going to do with all your free time? Pat, what are you going to do with all your free time once fantasy football is fully over?
Well, admittedly enough, I have had an abhorrent amount of free time the last 3 months. I think I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be going back to work soon after I dealt with a pretty nasty back problem for about 3 months. At our draft on Labor Day was right when it happened. I remember. I'm like, yeah, shit, like that was so long ago. I'm gonna go back to work. In my free time now, I've just been I think I've watched every YouTube video ever.
Have you checked out the esteemed channel Benchwarmer Brand?
Well, of course, yeah. I like our own. Sure. I like all of our podcast streams too. Just inflate the likes as anyone should. And I've been creating an immaculate grid database for baseball. It's psychotic. Oh my God. I have a running list. I have a running list of every player I've ever used in immaculate grid, and how many times.
Have you used Vidal Nuno yet?
I have not used Vidal Nuno yet, but I have used 890 different players.
I couldn't name 890 players if you put a gun to my head.
And there's a lot of guys that I haven't used yet. I was looking through it. I'm like, man, I haven't used this guy yet. But that's what so I guess my question is the other way around. It's like, what have I been doing with my free time versus now? Brandon and I are going to be completely flipped.
Yeah, God, what am I going to do with my free time? Well, I mean, I do play fantasy basketball, so I always have a fantasy sport to like monitor and check over. I like fantasy basketball. It's just a lot different and less. Yeah. You're definitely less invested in it than you are for football. Like, it's just something to do.
With guys sitting in these injuries, like, I haven't played fantasy basketball in more than a few years. And, like, I have no interest. Like, it just seems like it could be a real drag.
I like having it as something to just occupy my fantasy craving because I am a goddamn addict. But what am I going to do with my free time? God, it's more about what am I going to do with the free time once the full NFL season ends, because for now it's just going to be dedicating more time to, making content and all that, which I'll never stop doing. Obviously, it's my job. But for now, it's so ramped up. Once the NFL season ends and I'm out from underneath some of these some of these brand deals and some of the just nonsense of the season, nothing. I'm going off the grid for like a week.
What are we gonna do on this podcast? Because like we kind of started right before the draft. The draft last year. When I joined, it was perfect because we just kind of jumped right in and had something to talk about right away. We've got a few months until, obviously, we'll be talking about the draft and certain things like that. But like, it's really
had the
not
pod
draft
though during
season
like
until like March.
We had the pod though during like March Madness and stuff like that, but you're right. We've never had the pod during the like initial you and I at least, during the initial aftermath of the football season. So I mean, we'll obviously talk about the playoffs and it'll be probably less fantasy focused, and we'll mix in maybe some other sports again. But look, guys, feel free to send us suggestions. Again, I think Pat the divisional sort of what's the word, like breakdown of just how the season transpired. It'll be nice. It'll be a nice way to fill some time and be similar to the previews. It'll be like, okay, why did things play out this way that we either did see coming or didn't see coming? And how do we evaluate these players as of right now heading into next year? Obviously there will be draft conjecture. I think we'll fill the time, but yeah, there will definitely be more than just fantasy football being talked about on this pod as the season comes to a close and we enter the offseason. It'll be fun.
The drafts are back, baby.
The drafts will be back for sure. Stuff like the sports movies draft, and we will get chaotic with it. So yeah, definitely send us your suggestions for drafts and for segments you want to see.
Best athletes in the High School Musical sports movie draft.
Yup. I don't know.
First overall
the best
pick
athlete
is the kid that was playing the cello in the cafeteria. He's 101.
I'm picking Corbin Blue. All right. Shit. But yeah, definitely send us your suggestions for what you want to see once the fantasy season ends. But Pat, we got a couple more weeks with the fantasy season being alive. Hey, maybe we'll dip into some DFS stuff once the playoffs get in, because there's still some fantasy to be had as long as there is football. But yeah, we are getting closer here to the end, Pat. It's what a ride it's been for the fantasy football season.
Man, it's flown. Well, it's not over, but it's
not over yet. It's not over yet. But we are getting there. It's over. It's over for us in our main league, though. So that's what kind of starts to make it feel a little bit real. But yeah, that'll do it, Pat. You got anything to tell the people before we go off?
No, just good luck for those of you still playing. Good luck. Hopefully next week we're talking to a lot of you that are getting ready for your championship games.
Absolutely, and we will have plenty more advice for you to hopefully finish off those championship games. But for now, guys, that'll do it for this episode. For Pat Gustafson, I am Brandon Carney, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye-bye.